The days after Yu Menglong's death were like the slow unraveling of a carefully woven fabric, with each thread revealing the frail truth behind the polished surface of the film business. Long before the boycott got traction and hashtags appeared on millions of screens, there were early indications that something had gone horribly wrong on the set of Hope. These modest indicators were quickly obscured by the film's aggressive publicity campaign. But when the news of his death surfaced, every detail of his final weeks became painfully clear. The first cracks formed in the memories of individuals who had collaborated closely with him. Crew members discreetly reported extremely long filming days that lasted late into the night, timetables that changed without warning, and physical demands that exhausted even veteran performers. Yu Menglong, known for his discipline and commitment, handled the pressures with grace, but his professionalism concealed a mounting struggle that few recognized at the time. That fight would eventually become the focal point of a gathering storm that no studio could contain. The official story described an unfortunate loss, a tragedy unrelated to production circumstances. However, supporters who liked Yu Menglong felt that the explanation lacked the depth and openness that the situation required. Their intuition, honed over years of navigating the complex ecosystem of digital fandom, compelled them to explore deeper. They began looking into interviews, behind-the-scenes footage, and previously unnoticed instances where his tiredness was obvious but handled. What emerged was an unnerving juxtaposition between the meticulously planned promotional materials and candid glimpses of an actor who appeared exhausted by more than just the weight of his part. As questions arose, whispers from within the production began to circulate among fans. A message here, a screenshot there, and the rare voice note indicating internal concerns had been expressed. These bits aroused suspicion, but were insufficient to create a concrete charge. Nonetheless, each fresh leak fueled an increasing sense of anxiety. According to multiple sources, warnings regarding unsafe conditions and excessive workloads were purportedly passed to upper management, but no substantive changes were implemented. This disparity between perceived distress and a lack of corrective action provided the emotional anchor for the movement that followed. For fans, Yu Menglong was more than just an actor. He represented sincerity and determination. The possibility that he had been subjected to silent pressures that had gone unnoticed by those in charge of his well-being shook their faith. Grief abruptly changed into alertness. Vigilance turned into suspicion. And suspicion became into determination. During this traumatic adjustment, the roots of the boycott were planted. The question was no longer whether anything horrible occurred, but if it might have been avoided. Industry analysts who later investigated the case identified deeper structural difficulties in fast-paced film productions. High-budget initiatives, driven by aggressive timetables and profit expectations, frequently face enormous strain. In such circumstances, safety and well-being might take a back seat to reaching release schedules and securing box office performance. While no conclusive evidence had yet emerged, the circumstances surrounding Yu Menglong's dying days prompted unsettling questions about the systemic cost of constant output demands. The core of the problem was not a single action, but a series of choices created by a society that valued endurance and minimized vulnerability. Concerns concerning health and safety were frequently viewed as hurdles rather than urgent signals under this paradigm. The idea that Yu Menglong may have expressed discomfort or exhaustion only to be treated with indifference sparked moral fury among people who believed he had given his all to his profession. The conflict between his dedication and the studio's perceived negligence served as the emotional foundation for the narrative that fans rallied around. As more shards of information became available online, the movement grew. Fan communities began creating timelines, comparing behind-the-scenes recordings to leaked texts, and documenting any discrepancies between the studio's explanations and the developing proof. This collective probe found a worrying pattern: early signs of tiredness, increased pressure to execute important scenes, and an apparent disregard for internal warnings about the toll the timetable was having. The pain of losing an admired person was accompanied by a growing suspicion that he had been placed in danger. The most compelling cause driving the boycott, however, was the belief that Yu Menglong's death represented a larger issue in the entertainment business. Fans recognized him as a human representation of other performers and crew workers who faced similar challenges without acknowledgement or protection. Their devotion to him grew into a bigger mission, to confront an environment that, in their opinion, had permitted tragedy to happen. This transition from personal grieving to collective accountability generated emotional and strategic impetus. By the time the public outcry became too much to ignore, the movement had already grown into a formidable force. It was no longer motivated by rumors, but by a burning desire to learn the truth and ensure that no other performer suffered the same fate. The question that resonated across every platform, vigil, and discussion was simple but powerful. If warnings were ignored, how many lives had been put at risk prior to this crisis? The complexity of this question influenced the course of everything that followed. It signaled the start of a cultural reckoning, demanding transparency, accountability, and reform. And it signaled to the industry that the period of silent acceptance was over. Fans were no longer willing to remain passive bystanders. What are your thoughts about this? Comment Amen below so we can continue the unfinished stories. The initial shock following Yu Menglong's death stemmed not from rumors or leaked documents, but from a silent, agonizing awareness that something had gone horribly wrong in his final days. Before the boycott became nationwide, before protests and candlelight vigils lit up theater screens across China, a smaller, more intimate storm was brewing. It began with those who had worked alongside him, those who recall the atmosphere on set during the final weeks of filming Hope. Their accounts were initially muted, but clearly anxious. According to reports, filming days lasted late into the night, screenplays were continually altered under duress, and the production schedule appeared to be designed to push every participant to their limits. Yu Menglong, known for his cool professionalism, handled the weight of these requests without complaint. However, in the shadows of promotional material, minor clues emerged: a tremor in his hand, a tightness in his countenance, and bouts of exhaustion that attentive admirers later noticed as early warnings. These shards, previously dismissed as the burden of a high-profile undertaking, returned with heartbreaking clarity when word of his death broke. The studio's official statement attempted to separate the tragedy from the production conditions. However, fans familiar with the industry's rhythms saw anomalies. Their anguish was exacerbated by an innate belief that vital facts were missing, which prompted them to investigate every aspect of his final performances. They watched behind-the-scenes footage, interviews, and live-stream appearances, looking for similarities in his demeanor. What emerged was an image of a guy battling through rising tiredness, surrounded by a world that did not fully recognize his diminishing health. As the first disclosures emerged online, suspicions grew. A screenshot of a private communication suggested internal concerns about excessive workloads. A voice note indicated that a warning was ignored, with a firm insistence on fulfilling deadlines. These items were not definite, but they did provide a worrisome outline. Fans immediately recognized that Yu Menglong may have experienced serious physical and emotional distress in the absence of proper support. This possibility, the concern that his passion had overtaken the studio's responsibility, transformed sadness into resolve. Industry analysts later cited structural pressures that are usual in large-scale productions. When a film is expected to smash records, every hour becomes a war for creative ambition versus commercial necessity. In such environments, relaxation is optional, worries become impediments, and warnings might be overlooked in the race to deliver. The possibility that Yu Menglong may have expressed concerns, whether about his workload, well-being, or on-set safety, added to an already hefty tale. Fans believed he had taken on more than his fair share of the load. The emotional shift within the fan community was the true trigger of the catastrophe. They were wondering why rather than what had transpired. Why hadn't the early warnings been addressed? Why hadn't evident indicators of weariness triggered alarms? Why didn't the responsible parties step in? These questions reverberated throughout digital platforms with growing urgency. What began as grief has developed into a communal, unwavering pursuit for truth. As additional information became available, the storyline became more focused. If negligence had played a part, even indirectly, accountability was required. By the time public dissatisfaction reached its peak, the boycott had already begun. Fans felt it was their job to defend his legacy in the only way they could, by ensuring that his death was not viewed as a unique occurrence. Their movement was founded not on impulse, but on the notion that a deeper flaw in the manufacturing process needed to be identified and corrected. What are your thoughts about this? Comment Amen below so we can continue the unfinished stories. The wave of mourning enveloping Yu Menglong quickly evolved into something far more complex and strong. What started as a modest suspicion quickly became an overwhelming deluge of information, discussion, and fast-spreading digital evidence. The movement gained traction not as a result of a single disclosure, but as the online world got flooded with leaks that seemed to appear everywhere at once. Screenshots, audio files, pieces of internal messages, and anonymous testimony piled up quickly, revealing a story too big for the company to ignore and too emotional for fans to let go. The first major breach came in the form of a private chat log. It included a warning from a crew member who expressed concern that the excessive hours and inadequate safety standards could lead to significant consequences. The note explicitly expressed concern for Yu Menglong. Soon later, an audio recording purportedly captured a late-night session in which a director rejected weariness complaints with a single directive: "We have deadlines. The performer must persevere." Although the validity of these materials was questioned, their emotional power could not be denied. Fans immediately disseminated them across platforms, creating an environment in which every piece of information felt urgent and important. These breaches were dramatically amplified via social media. Hashtags like #BoycottHope and #Justice for Yu Menglong garnered millions of interactions in only hours. Entire communities came together to analyze each document, looking for hidden connotations or discrepancies in the studio's public claims. Influencers and content makers spent entire live sessions explaining why key terms in the leaked messages indicated a larger pattern of neglect. Others examined caravan frames, pointing out shakes in Yu Menglong's hands or shadows beneath his eyes, which they claimed indicated extreme tension. These emotionally charged observations struck a chord with millions of people who were already struggling to cope with his death. As the digital storm intensified, celebrities who had previously been silent began to acknowledge the increasing situation. Actors, producers, and industry veterans spoke openly about Yu Menglong's talent and demeanor, supporting the notion that he was a beloved figure in the entertainment industry. A well-known actress said, "Yu Menglong was a brilliant and kind-hearted soul. If the industry cannot protect its people, we must speak up." Her remark was widely distributed in domestic and foreign media, lending legitimacy to fans' concerns and adding weight to the ongoing dispute. As famous voices entered the discourse, global media sources began to cover the situation. The boycott was presented by international entertainment media as a watershed event in issues about actor safety, labor ethics, and fan communities' growing power. Headlines highlighted the enormous scale of the backlash, as well as the studio's increasingly vulnerable position as the narrative slipped out of its control. The narrative of hope grew beyond a cultural debate in China. becoming a global case study in how modern audiences react to perceived shortcomings in transparency and responsibility. Economic consequences rapidly followed. Pre-sales for Hope fell dramatically, indicating not only emotional agony among fans, but also a general withdrawal of support. As public outcry grew, several theater chains allegedly considering canceling all showing. Streaming platforms were requested to remove promotional information, and coordinated web efforts encouraged users to avoid engaging with any film-related marketing materials. The fast transition from joy to rejection demonstrated the enormous power that digital communities possess when unified around a common issue. At the heart of this media frenzy was a fundamental shift in fan identification. They were no longer passive customers. They grew into investigators, advocates, and storytellers about Yu Menglong's life and death. Every leak, analysis, and internet post reinforced their belief that accountability was necessary. Their efforts elevated the boycott into a cultural moment, challenging the long-standing relationship between production studios and the audiences that support them. By the time the second wave of leaks emerged, emails citing tiredness, behind-the-scenes recordings implying stressed conditions, and internal memos prioritizing deadlines over well-being, the movement's momentum had reached a breaking point. The studio was no longer dealing with rumors. It was up against a collective force motivated by grief, fury, and a desire to guarantee that Yu Menglong's final chapter was not overshadowed by unanswered questions. The crisis surrounding Hope reached its lowest point when the movement grew beyond digital outrage and became a force capable of transforming the industry itself. What began as random gestures of mourning evolved into a coordinated, national push for accountability. Inside the studio, executives faced constant pressure. Every hour brought a new surge of viral messages, public demands, and new disclosures, exacerbating the mistrust surrounding Yu Menglong's final days. They had completely lost their sense of control over the narrative. The tipping moment came when a new set of leaked materials surfaced online. Unlike the earlier fragments, these texts appeared to follow a precise chronological order. Internal communications discussed tiredness, insufficient breaks, and the need for improved safety oversight. One communication purportedly received by a production assistant expressed concern that Yu Menglong was approaching a critical point of tiredness. The response, which prioritized deadlines over everything else, sparked immediate uproar. Fans saw these encounters as representative of a system that prioritized productivity over personal well-being. Whether the emails were genuine or not, their emotional impact shifted public view almost immediately. While the studio attempted to coordinate a coherent reaction, fan communities stepped up their efforts. Online detectives compiled detailed timelines of every important event throughout the making of Hope. They compared leaked documents to behind-the-scenes film, public declarations, and recorded timetables. Their inquiries were painstaking, motivated not just by love, but also by a need to comprehend how a tragedy could occur in plain sight. Even while the accuracy of some allegations remained debatable, the sheer volume of data generated a collective momentum that no official denial could withstand. The movement's apex occurred when protests expanded throughout China. Candlelight vigils appeared in front of major cinema chains, with thousands holding images of Yu Menglong and banners demanding justice. These gatherings remained calm, but their influence was significant. They drew national media attention and elevated the debate into popular discourse. The presence of bereaved fans revealed an important truth. This was no longer a film-related issue. It had evolved into a public reckoning with the principles and duties of the entertainment industry. Celebrities increased the burden by openly expressing grief and worry. Their remarks held emotional weight, particularly those from people who had worked closely with Yu Menglong. Several asked the business to address structural concerns, highlighting the importance of transparent safety standards and decent working conditions. Their voices reinforce the gravity of the situation, making it increasingly harder for the studio to dismiss the dispute as a passing public relations issue. International media quickly reported on the escalating turmoil, describing it as a watershed event for world film. The world watched as fans challenged corporate power in unprecedented ways, proving that audience devotion can mature into a powerful tool for social accountability. Analysts began forecasting catastrophic financial losses for Hope, with estimates indicating a 70% or greater reduction in box office income. The prospect of such losses prompted theater chains and streaming services to reconsider their involvement with the picture. Faced with rising demonstrations and a failing reputation, the studio considered drastic steps. To minimize further criticism, discussions reportedly discussed delaying the film's release indefinitely, issuing official public apologies, modifying marketing techniques, and even eliminating specific parts involving Yu Menglong. However, despite these discussions, the public remained skeptical. Many people questioned whether such efforts were genuine or just attempts to save the film's performance. The genuine breakthrough, however, did not occur in the studio. It comes from the supporters. Their joint demands prompted the business to recognize that consumers expected more than just entertainment. They expected integrity. The movement showed that fan communities were no longer passive bystanders. They had become watchdogs capable of influencing billion-dollar choices, holding studios accountable, and redefining ethical norms in the film industry. The transformation was evident. Yu Menglong's name, which was previously identified exclusively with his performances, has become the spark for a new era in industry recognition. His death exposed flaws in production culture, the implications of excessive pressure, and sparked a generation of viewers committed to guarantee that such a catastrophe never occurred again. Following the developing disaster, the world around Hope entered a moment of unpleasant contemplation. Public indignation, fan action, and relentless examination had sent a ripple far beyond the film itself. Studios, distributors, and entertainment executives in Asia were pushed to rethink their internal systems and assumptions. What was once considered ordinary practice in manufacturing contexts now appeared fragile, even irresponsible, in the face of public scrutiny. The loss of Yu Menglong, while extremely personal to those who admired him, had become a cultural mirror that revealed the industry's latent cracks. The economic ramifications were swift and devastating. Pre-sale numbers plummeted, marketing activities halted, and alliances weakened as businesses moved to separate themselves from the controversy. The picture, which was once expected to break records, became a cautionary tale about the limitations of commercial ambition. Analysts remarked that, while the financial losses were enormous, they were not the most essential component of the situation. The deeper impact was the breakdown of trust between viewers and the organizations designed to entertain them. Once destroyed, trust required far more than statements or apologies to repair. Beyond the financial consequences, the cultural implications were increasingly apparent. Even the most experienced media professionals were taken aback by the level of organization and tenacity displayed by fans. Their efforts demonstrated that modern audiences are not passive consumers of entertainment, but rather active players in defining the ethical landscape around it. Digital communities, formerly underestimated, have demonstrated their ability to chronicle, research, and mobilize on a scale that rivals established institutions. The rise of these groups constituted a watershed moment in how accountability operates in the entertainment industry. Within this atmosphere, business leaders faced a terrible reality. The systems they had established no longer reflected the ideals of those who backed them. Safety, openness, and ethical responsibility were no longer optional goals, but rather necessary demands. Several studios quietly began reviewing their working conditions, crisis management techniques, and internal communication systems. Others began looking for additional criteria to protect artists and crew workers. These steps, however encouraging, constituted simply the beginning of a protracted process of cultural revolution. Fans of Yu Menglong saw the movement's significance as going beyond the immediate controversy. Their actions sent a message to the industry that everyone, regardless of status, deserved to be protected, treated with dignity, and respected. Their collective grief transformed into a force capable of influencing previously untouchable systems. They were determined not only to honor the memory of a beloved actor, but also to ensure the future well-being of countless others in the same profession. As the dust settled, questions remained about how the industry would move forward. Would studios embrace meaningful change, or would they wait for public interest to wane before returning to old habits? Will fans continue to serve as accountability watchdogs, or will this be a one-time event shaped by extraordinary circumstances? These uncertainties persisted throughout the conversation, emphasizing the complexities of the path ahead. Despite the shifting narratives, one unsolved reality remained, a question that rang through every discussion, analysis, and quiet moment of reflection. But the real question is what else they haven't told us.